I'm Didier Carson, and it's a great pleasure to be here at Roche by the Rhine River with Christophe France, the chairman of Roche. Thanks for being with us, Christophe.
It's a pleasure, Didier.
So I would like today to talk about stakeholders and to address stakeholders. There are two categories of stakeholders I would like to get insights on, particularly patients, because after all, this is what we're here for, right? But also governments and national societies. So let's start with patients. How do you work from the board at having a patient's view of Roche?
We have a saying that doing now what patients need next. That is included as the last slide in every presentation at Roche. And in the beginning, I felt this was only kind of a marketing thing. But when you consistently use it in your presentation, it is a constant reminder of the purpose of the company. Mm-hmm. And this is obviously also central for the board to always be conscious. Why are we doing things? Yes, the numbers are also important when you're running a company, but it is more the product and what can we deliver? How can we contribute for the positive development of this world?
So do you feel COVID has transformed your view as a board or as an organization, or it was already there and just amplified it somehow?
I would say it was already existing. We have an existing culture in the board, in the company, and we benefited from the alignment a culture is providing to everybody. You do not have to agree explicitly on many things because there are many, many things which are obvious. So it is not a question, for example, that in case of a crisis, what is the first element of the financials, which are in the forefront. But for us, being in the very privileged situation to contribute to master the crisis via our diagnostic tests and also via having a look at our existing medicines, whether they can contribute to alleviate a little bit the burden of COVID-19. This is a privileged situation, and then you have to think of how can we deliver this in the best way, the fastest way to do it.
That's right. And clearly you have a massive role, right, as an organization during this crisis because of your diagnostics arm. Do you see that as a balancing act between the stakeholder and the shareholders, the stakeholder concerns and the profitability? How do you look at this?
Right now, to be honest, I think it's less the angle of profitability which is in the forefront, but clearly there is a lot of involvement and interaction and collaboration with competitors. For example, to speed up development of medicine, we have engaged in the collaboration with a US company, Regeneron, to co-develop a certain medicine which is hopefully effective, we will see, to treat the disease and maybe even for prophylactic use. Mm-hmm. And on top of developing, we will also co-manufacture, in case of success, this medicine. And this kind of sharing of capabilities has never been so pronounced as right now. And the same is true with regard to our interaction with regulators, particularly medical approval authorities. So in the past, we did our thing and then we handed over tons of paper and they started to look at it. Today, it's more a parallel approach. So while we are still generating insight and advancing, for example, clinical trials, they are already looking at interim data. They are discussing with us about the design of these trials. So that has changed and has speeded up the development, and I hope that this is something which will create a kind of lasting legacy which we can also use in post-COVID times, because it is benefiting to bring new innovative medicines and diagnostic tests faster to patients.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. And with pricing implications as well, right? And so implications of your interaction with society in many different ways. How are the board discussions around that? Because your board is composed, of what I would call traditional business people, right? CEOs of large companies, possibly not from pharma. You have family members as well. You have scientists as well, right?
I think we have invested quite a lot in the past years to create an alignment and a common view on this business. But you are emphasizing what I feel is a strength of the Roche board, the diversity of those who are sharing their perspectives and bringing their knowledge to the table. And the more diverse you are, the more you can have a really, let's say, an educated look on the opportunities, risks, which are developing in case of crisis. But the fundament is the trust which you have developed. But this is something you do not develop during crisis times. You have to invest into trust building, into team building of a board on a permanent basis. And then, in case of crisis, you can benefit from it.
And Roche has one of the strongest reputations in the pharma world. Do you feel somehow the family anchor is a strong asset for that, or it's rather neutral in that environment?
I would differentiate. When you look at the current pandemic, I don't think that family ownership has been a differentiating factor, because this is very fast action, decision taking of the board, whereas as a very long-term shareholder in the company, the family ownership for us is extremely beneficial when it comes to taking, for example, scientific, we call it bets, when you develop certain projects of things where is a high risk that you do not manage to be successful. And they're the long-term perspective. The family shares it and encourages it, and encourages also to take risks which will hopefully pay out only in the long term.
So I can see that dimension of the board value add around the social dimension and the value add of Roche as an organization. We're going potentially towards somewhat of a perfect storm on the geopolitics front, right? With some nations taking strong stances. We've had the executive presidential order in the US. There is a lot of thinking, right, about the rising of tension there. How do you feel the board is tackling that? And do you see an evolution, actually, of board work around geopolitics forthcoming?
We will definitely have to closely observe the changes in geopolitics, particularly with regards to the whole healthcare environment. So we have already been involved in a very diverse field of healthcare systems, ways how to address. What was an interesting finding in the time of crisis was the fact that our globally distributed supply chains were turned out to be a very good asset to defend individual countries to try to get access to all of our products which we manufacture in a specific country. For example, if we do the diagnostic tests, our instruments are manufactured in Switzerland. The so-called consumables, so small plastic caps, etc., under very specific conditions, manufactured in Germany. The active ingredients for the tests are manufactured in the US. So you need to bring everything, to bring it together, and that prevents that there are hurdles being implemented. And that is also the reasons why I'm very reluctant to follow this idea, which has been emphasized by some heads of state, that we have to renationalize things. It doesn't mean that you should not think about dependencies, you should not think on, for example, emergency stocks, but I think open borders and global supply chains where an element of resilience of the industry, which overall has provided in a tremendous effort, a lot of contribution to manage a disease which we did not know 6 months ago.
Yeah. So overall, are you happy with the reaction of the pharma industry to the current health crisis? What's your view of the overall industry?
For me, it is fascinating to see that an industry which in public perception has been perceived in many cases as negative and more creative of costs, and obviously the cost too high, etc. And nobody has had a good feeling about the risks which are involved in developing medicine and spending all this money for research and development. And this perception, that has substantially changed. I think from a Roche perspective, the importance of our diagnostics activities have a very different level of attention, not only from external analysts or the broad public, but I'm honest, also inside Roche, yeah, because 80% was pharma, so we are a company in most dimensions thinking in terms of pharma, and now diagnostics has a different value also inside the company, but also outside. And the pharma industry, I think, overall has shown a huge level of collaboration, which has never existed, and this has also been perceived by the broad public. And now I would say many people in society have realized that this industry is a very essential part of the solution of the corona pandemic. Politics can manage it, but the solution in terms of medicines or of diagnostic tests has to come from the healthcare industry.
Do you have an interaction with large institutional investors, the sovereign wealth funds, etc., or do you have such an anchor with family, with a Novartis holding, etc., that this is not really happening from your side?
No, in the contrary. We always fear that Roche is in the best of both worlds, because on the one hand side we have the strong anchor in the share majority of the founding families still. Yeah. That provides us with the opportunity to take decisions independent from short-term shareholder perspective and stock exchange. On the other side, stock exchange and analysts and sovereign wealth funds, they have a look at our company. They share their perspective, which is very helpful if you take this serious. That doesn't mean that every advice you get, you will follow up to this advice, but it's very helpful. And in this sense, we have continued our interactions with, for example, our analysts, our banks, our big other shareholders, as usual. But what has changed, it was more via video conferencing and less physically. So. But we continue permanently to update, and there is a huge interest. I would say the interest in what we are doing, how the pandemic is impacting our employees, the companies, obviously also the financials, but also the impact which we can provide to deliver solutions for society.
And you have a sustainability committee, right, combined with your governance committee. Is sustainability there very much environmentally minded, or it's a more long-term view minded for the organization? How do you think the sustainability committee's role on the board?
Sustainability has been part of our DNA, as we phrase it, probably also triggered by a natural interest in some of the family shareholders in this topic, a long time before the word sustainability even existed. Okay. So this kind of thinking with Lucas Hoffmann, he was one of the co-founders of the WWF. So there is a long-term tradition to include this dimension into the way how we are running the company, how we are acting, what is our system of values, what is the culture of the company. And it's not by chance that the last 10 years Roche has been elected the most sustainable, or one of the two most sustainable healthcare companies worldwide, which is something which we are proud of. And it means that we try to include this dimension in the sense of providing a net positive contribution to society as one of our major ambitions in the company.
Maybe the last topic I would like to approach is really around organizational health, employees. Is this a topic for management only? Is there an interaction between you as chair, Severin as CEO, other board members reflecting on the organizational health? And how have your employees fared during this COVID crisis?
Yeah, there has been a new way of interacting with the employees, less obviously from a board perspective, more from an executive management perspective, via virtual town hall meetings, for example. So we once, fairly early in the crisis, were able to have 20,000 employees globally included in such a virtual town hall with the possibility to share some ideas and at the same time also take up the questions of employees, which are different. And the situation also of the pandemic is very different in different countries. So that has
But you
changed.
would not participate yourself, right, to some of these, or
No.
you do?
I
that's
do not.
Severin or
Normally,
his delegates.
I complement Severin's business travels to the affiliates in the world.
Okay.
But given the COVID crisis, that is not something I can do right now.
Okay.
But then I have an opportunity not only to talk to our employees, I will talk to the local management, I can talk to local healthcare stakeholders, politics, for example. So that is a little bit the result of a philosophy that Severin's working days has 24 hours, mine has 24 hours, and together it's 48. So we can achieve a little bit more together.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Christophe.
Thank you, Didier.